All right, so I'm going to go over just some info and how to get started on just the very beginning of acrylic painting. So at the top here, I have my acrylic notes. These are the things that you wrote down from the presentation. Down here, I had a video about how to set this up. Just to use your palette or any other circle thing, and it doesn't have to be a perfect circle. And then we have our 12 slices. Now it's a little bit hard to see the difference in my colors on here. So what you will want to do is find a reference photo color wheel. We're using color wheels in the classroom to kind of match those colors, but we want really even steps in between the colors. We have our palette set up. So this is about color mixing. So even if you have all of these colors already pre-mixed at home, what I want you to do is to use only red, yellow, and blue to mix those. Now, one thing I'm noticing is that some of my paints were new and they have separated. So the polymer has separated from the actual from the pigment, and that makes it a little bit harder to mix, and it makes my colors a little bit more transparent. So, but we're going to be working only with these. I also have black and white. Things that I talked about yesterday or to get set up. I have a cup of water here. I use my cup of water to change the colors, but I don't really use it to water down my colors. I am trying to use this more opaque. So if you kind of see here, this area is not opaque. So I'm going to use a couple layers to build that up to be solid. So you're going to find with a higher quality paint, you don't need to do many layers. But our paint is kind of middle of the road. So on these lighter yellow values, I'm going to need to add some extra layers. I also have paper towel here. And I am using a synthetic bristle brush. I like this flat brush. We used these for watercolor, and they are great for watercolor. I would recommend having dedicated watercolor brushes. You could use these for acrylic, but they're going to tend to be a little bit softer, not hold the heavier paint. And then once you use a brush for acrylic, they will probably, even if you rinse your brush really, really well, you're still going to have some plastic left in it, and then it won't be really good for watercolor. So I would keep those separate if you have them. Worst case scenario, that's the only thing you have at home, you can use that. So what's happening here is that I am working around my color wheel, and I am mixing, if I have enough spaces, I'm mixing the color in the wells. If you don't have a palette like this, you can certainly use really any plastic container. Don't use anything that you might end up eating off of. So if you have a plastic, dinner plate and you want to only use it for acrylic paint, go for it. But don't use it with acrylic and then go try to eat off of it. So I can use this also to mix. So what I'm going to do, I think the easiest way to do this is to start with yellow and just paint that area. Then I am going to either go into the yellow oranges, orange, red, orange, or I'm going to go into the greens. So I've already done my yellow oranges and oranges, even though I need to add a few more layers over there. You don't need a very thick layer. Like I said, if it is transparent, you are going to just allow it to dry and then add a new layer. If you try to get it really thick, it's not going to dry well for you. It'll be just kind of clumpy. So opt to have thin layers that dry in between rather than one thick layer. So here is yellow. Now I'm going to move to yellow-green. So I'm going to take a little bit of this blue, and this is separated, so I'm going to try to get rid of the gooey stuff and just get some pigment, but unfortunately, and this might be happening to you too, and we're just going to work with it. So I'm going to take just a little bit of that, and the darker color will really dominate that yellow. So I don't know if you can see how much I have in there. It's about that much. I am planning on continuing to add blue into this and mixing and painting yellow green, green, and blue green, all with that same mixture. I just keep adding to it. So I'm going for a yellow green. It looks okay. You can, test it on the side if you need to. It's a little too light. So I'm going to mix a little bit more. How do I know it's too light? I'm just going to test it next to my color wheel. So this is one of those that's a very light color, and I might need to let that first layer dry and then come back and add a second layer a little bit later. But if I'm using a thin layer, that should dry pretty quickly. And this came out pretty even. So I don't think I need another layer. Okay, I am going to now, notice I'm not rinsing out my brush because I'm working with the same, kind of colors, these greens, blue. All right, I'm gonna move on, and I'm adding a little bit more blue, and I'm trying to get that true green color, kind of that Crayola green. And I'm going to add as much blue as I need to make that to be the green that I'm looking for. And unfortunately, that is a lot because this is separated. So again, I tested out here. Still looks like it's a yellow green. So I'm gonna need more blue. So I'm gonna continue like that. Keep mixing in this one area, add my green, paint the green, add more blue, make a blue green. Then I'm going to completely rinse out my brush, and I'm going to dry my brush, and then I'll get blue. So when I rinse my brush, I'm kind of almost painting on the bottom of the cup. I want to make sure I get all of that color out of there, and I can see I still have yellow. So I'm going to keep rinsing. All right, after you're done with your color wheel, that takes about 20 minutes, I find, maybe a little more if you need some layers. Rinse out my brush completely. Now I'm going to do this value scale. So on one side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On the other side, W means white, then light, then medium, medium dark, and dark. Do this with just white and black. If you do it with a color, that's fine, but you'd still need white on this end. So what is that going to look like? I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take just a pile of white and make sure your brush is completely clean. And I'm going to paint it white. Seems silly, but that's what we're doing. It's okay. All right. Then I truly believe this is just the easiest way to do this. Then I'm going to add just a little bit of black to that pile of white. So, oh no, I am going to have to get just a little bit more black. All right, so I have black. Now, I know people don't like to use like the end of the bottle because they feel like it doesn't pour out as easily, but this is actually pretty good paint in here because it has a lot of pigment in it. If I start a new bottle, usually I have to do a lot of mixing in order to get the polymer to mix in with the pigment. So, all right, now let's do this. So I'm going to take just a tiny bit of black. It does not take a lot in order to start to affect the white. If you do this with a color, it is fine. So instead of mixing in black, you would add in maybe like just a little bit of red. So I want to make sure I do all of my mixing in my palette. So that even means that I'm going to kind of like push the paint back out of my brush. So when I tend to mix, the paint will kind of creep up here towards the ferrule. And that's still good paint in there, And sometimes I'll wipe it and then I'll remix it. If you have a thicker paint, you can use a palette knife. So I'm going to mix this whole pile because I'm going to continue to paint each one of these from the same one. All right, now I have it really globbed up. Now when it's really globbed up, I'm not really able to paint very neatly. So I'm going to wipe off a lot. I can also just wipe it off in a paper towel. So if you are getting a lot of paint globbed up in your bristles, wipe it, somehow wipe it off. Okay, here's the next color. This is my light gray. Again, I'm trying to make it even. I don't want any bumps or ridges of paint, so I'm going to smooth it out. And that's why a flat brush is good for this technique, but you can also use a round brush. All right, that looks a little dark. I am unsure about that. I'm going to let it dry. It dries a little bit lighter. But in the meantime, I feel like I'm going to add just a little bit more black to get a true medium gray. And I might have to go back and repaint that a little bit lighter. So I don't know if you can tell the streaks of white in here. I did not mix this completely in my palette. So I'm going to go back and do that. Mix it completely in my palette before I paint when you want a smooth application. Now there are times you don't want a smooth application. You want it to be painterly or textured. All right. Actually, now I'm satisfied with that color. I think that is a nice light color. I'm going to add a little bit more black, make it this is my medium dark. So sometimes if you look at a colored pencil, they say something like 50% gray. This would be like a 50% gray. Now I'm on to like a 75% gray. And you can think about the amount of black to white. So I'm starting to paint that right next to it, and I can barely, no, I think I can see the good difference. So I'm going to stick with that. Again, they dry just a little bit lighter. And then I'm going to do pure black. So that means I'm going to have to rinse this out. Now we're going to still work in this palette. I know it's a hot mess, but for our next assignment, you are going to be continuing to mix a lot of colors. So we will continue to use these paints because there's going to be so much mixing. We don't need that many pure colors. So there's just pure black. So 5-step even value scale from white to a light value to medium, medium dark, and black. If you do this with a color, it's fine. So if I was going to do red, I would do white, a light pink, probably just solid red, red with a little bit of black, and then black. So you can do the value scale with a color. It's easiest just to do it with black, white, and gray. So that is that. That will be an assignment. You will take a picture of your notes, your finished color wheel, make sure it's labeled, and your 5-step value scale.